This program contains candid discussion of gender identity and may include adult topics and language. Listener discretion is advised. This episode of Trans Chat with Christiana is being brought to you by TruVoice Lessons LLC. Offering the finest in online and in-person voice and music instruction, TruVoice Lessons has what you're looking for. Transgender voice training, singing, piano, guitar, and much, much more. Let our highly qualified staff of instructors help you achieve your goals. TruVoiceLessons.com. Unlock your true voice today.
Trans Chat with Christiana. Real people, real lives, real talk. Trans Chat with Christiana.
Hi, and welcome to Trans Chat with Christiana. Real people, real lives, real talk. I am your host, Christiana Brekke. On this, our premiere episode, I'm honored to have as my special guest, Anna Lantry. She is the director and head instructor at TruVoice Lessons LLC. They are a music and voice lessons company that specializes in transgender voice training. They also offer a wide variety of singing and musical instrument lessons, both online and in person at select cities. She provides a much-needed service to the trans community while also employing transgender instructors and staff members, including me. TruVoice Lessons LLC is also sponsoring this podcast. Definitely looking forward to chatting with Anna. So, what is Trans Chat with Christiana? Who the heck is Christiana, and what qualifies me to have a podcast? My vision is simple. I am a trans woman who has had the opportunity to meet many fascinating and wonderful trans people. Smart people, successful people, diverse people, strong and resilient people, incredibly strong and resilient, brave people, people whose stories need to be told. If the statistics are right, according to a GLAAD survey, 80% of Americans don't even know a transgender person, or at least are not aware that they know one. And consider the countless depictions of trans people in film and TV, ridiculous representations that show us as insane, perverted, deceptive, socially deviant. It's no wonder we're so despised. If you haven't yet seen the Netflix special called Disclosure, hosted by Laverne Cox, I would highly recommend it. It has lots of examples of how gender identity and expression in film have been linked to madness, used to evoke disgust, and perhaps most commonly of all, laughter. In that regard, I think trans women have it the worst. If Maxwell Klinger, Tootsie, and Mrs. Doubtfire were your only exposure to transgender identity, variation, and expression, what other reaction could there be? Media and film have painted us in such unfavorable colors. In the Trump era, in the torrents of another nasty presidential election year, trans people are once again poised to be fodder for the conservative hate machine. Gross distortions of truth and outright lies will be cast to help scare ignorant voters back to the polls. Donald Trump and other conservatives will continue to exploit mistruths about trans people for political capital. Why? Because 80% of Americans do not personally know a trans person, and half of those will believe whatever BS they're told about us. We really shouldn't stand for this. My vision is simple. I want to highlight the lives and struggles and achievements of as many amazing trans people as I possibly can, to talk about the real issues relevant to trans people, dispel the myths, and clear up the misconceptions and the lies. I want Trans Chat with Christiana to be a source of both information and inspiration to the trans community. I also hope the podcast can be a valuable resource for our allies, friends, and family. anyone who wants to learn more about real trans people and the real struggles we face as such a belittled and marginalized segment of the population. I hope you will join the discussion by liking us on Facebook at Trans Chat with Christiana and sharing your stories. Real people, real lives, real talk.
Trans Chat with Christiana.
My guest today is a successful businesswoman who has chosen to use her talents to serve the transgender community and beyond. I'm so pleased to introduce to the podcast Anna Lantry, Director and Head Instructor at TruVoice Lessons LLC. Anna, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Christy. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for coming, sharing your story, and telling us all about TruVoice Lessons. I definitely want to get to that. But first, let's talk a little about you. You're a trans woman, correct?
Yes.
So how was your transition? Are you still transitioning or are you transitioned?
So I'm still transitioning at this point. We're a little bit over the 2-year mark at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't done any surgeries yet, but those are in the works. Hoping to get that all done in like the next year. Removing the facial hair that's left, probably a year to 2 years. And that's probably going to be all that's left. Like,
nice.
HRT's been going on for a while. I've had great results from that. Very thankful for that.
Nice.
Legal name and gender change and all that. That's been done with for quite some time as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, it's almost like hurry up and wait. I got a lot of the initial stuff taken care of pretty quick. I almost shot out of a trans cannon. And then it's just the expensive stuff that requires a lot of logistics.
Yeah.
And you have to schedule it way ahead and hurry up and wait. That's where we're at now.
When did you realize you were trans, and how long did it take for you to accept it?
I knew I was a girl for as long as I could know.
Mm-hmm.
I remember telling my parents at about age 3 that I was a girl, and the reaction was like, no, you can't. I know that different people in different generations would have received, different reactions to something like that, even that young.
Oh, yeah.
Luckily, by the time I was that age and the generation I grew up in, it was just kind of like, no, silly, instead of like, your dad takes off his belt and beats the living shit out of you.
Yeah.
Because I've known people that's happened to.
Oh, yes.
As far as how long it took for me to accept, middle school age-ish, that's all that preoccupied me.
Yeah.
But I didn't talk about it. When I was about age 19, 20, same thing, preoccupied all the time with it. Very distracted by it, didn't talk about it. It was at age 26 that I finally said, okay, no, not this again.
Did you have any bad experiences with unaccepting family members?
It's hard to categorize it so simply because I don't think it ever is.
Yeah.
A lot of people initially were like, oh, okay, I don't care about that, that's fine. But I think as time goes on, and you have a bunch of friends or acquaintances that are of the same gender you were assumed to be, they stop associating with you over time because you're not one of them. You're not one of the boys, as it were.
Right.
So they kind of fade off based on appearances and I guess the kind of vibe you put off.
Yeah.
And, your body and other things changing and...
Right.
That's when the realizations really hit home and then they kind of fall off the radar. With family... There's plenty of people that were just like, oh, okay, that's no big deal. And you definitely run into with some family members, even if they say they're supportive or they say they understand or they say they don't have questions, they've kind of made some assumptions about it.
Yeah.
All by themselves, and they don't want to learn more.
Right.
Or they don't want to listen to your side of things.
Right.
So their behaviors might be that they give you the lip service of saying they're supportive or okay with it, but their actions kind of say they're 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Right.
Like, okay, we'll call you what you want to be called, but we're not going to take old pictures of you down, or something like that.
Did you have to come out in the workplace or in school, or were you able to sort of disappear and then reemerge as your true self?
So I was done with school at that point, both degrees, and I was working at the time. I was just working as a server at various restaurants. It wasn't any like high-profile job or anything. I remember being so worried about like I could lose everything. I could lose my family and friends and my job.
Yeah.
And the truth is, like, it's just not as big of a deal as you thought. It's a big deal to you because you don't know what's going to come next.
Right.
Fear of the unknown, fear of, like, what makes you you really versus what are things that you thought were you and those things are going to change. Like, it's hard to have a grasp of that as a trans person. Like, your sense of self is convoluted.
Right.
Because combination of denial and body parts mismatching and things.
What about outside of work? Like in your community or church? Were you ever a churchgoer?
I worked at a church, though I didn't believe in anything there. That was a paycheck. That was an opportunity to sing.
Yeah.
There were a lot of discussions and proposals about how to handle it amongst employees. So I heard. But I was never involved in those conversations. I never was asked for my input.
Naturally.
Well, they had all these plans about how to break the news to people. They never did communicate anything, and that kind of made it more difficult. I ended up leaving that job because of that.
Yeah.
I don't feel like they handled it appropriately. They weren't against it or anything. It's just they had all these plans, allegedly, that they didn't include me in or discuss with me, and then when it came time that I was actually going to be out at work at that church, I didn't do anything, or so it seemed.
Okay, moving on. You are the director and head instructor of TruVoice Lessons LLC. You offer lessons in music, singing, and transgender voice training. You hire trans staff members, including yours truly. I think it's a wonderful company doing wonderful things. Tell us all about TruVoice Lessons.
Sure. So while working my various jobs as I came out, and the other job I worked as a server, like, it wasn't really a big deal there to come out. Management was always supportive. Like, at the first place I was working, when I came out to management, they were just like, we can tell people for you, you can do it yourself, handle that how you will, we're not going to tell anyone without your permission.
Nice.
Actually wrote new policies for the whole company based on me, and that was pretty cool.
Wow, yeah.
But with TruVoice Lessons, I had gone to school to be a voice teacher. I still wanted to do music or something similar. Still wanted to put those skill sets into use, and I wasn't enough. I taught voice lessons, but not as much as I would have liked. And kind of saw that if I wanted to teach as much as I wanted to and make that my full-time thing, I was going to have to take a different approach. So becoming a company, getting a business name and tax IDs and all that, I decided was the way to go for me. Continued to work other jobs and try to gradually phase them out as I got more students. And then, of course, I was always ever aware, knowing it could affect me, that unemployment or underemployment amongst trans people is alarmingly high.
Yes.
So I got to a point where I had a lot of students for me, but my income and the number of people I could help and reach wasn't, like, they didn't match. I wanted to do more for people than I could as just a one-person show. So wanted to make more income, wanted to help more people, knew that there was a lot of unemployment in the trans community and amongst musicians or teachers, for that matter.
Yeah.
Trans or not.
Yeah.
So I decided the best way to do that was to expand our reach with more employees.
Nice.
So I've kind of stepped it more into a facilitator that wears a lot of hats, and I've got other people doing teaching now, and that number has gone up really fast.
Awesome.
And yeah, we're able to work with a couple hundred students, or we have the potential to anyways, at a time. Whereas with me, like the most I ever had for myself was 47, and that was really pushing it.
Yeah, that's a lot of students.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, so you were training to be a voice teacher. Were your sights always set on transgender voice training, or did that come about later on?
So trans voice training is something that was at least a minute part of it. I think the whole way along. It wasn't my primary focus at first. I was more focused on singing lessons.
Yeah.
But that became a more and more important thing to me because of the people that needed it. Versus it being a hobby someone thinks it would be nice to have when they can afford it.
Right.
I was working with someone that needed my expertise and resources. And then it became something that was important to me because voice was one of the first things I worked on.
Yeah.
And I had to struggle a lot along the way, like everyone does. And wanted to make that easier for other people. And knowing that this is hard to find, it became my priority.
When you decided to learn the art of voice feminization, where did you go to get that training?
A lot of facets to that. So I learned vocal technique to be a voice teacher and a singer. It's a lot of stuff from that. You're just applying things a little bit differently because your end goal is different. So what you can do is you can take this bag of tools you've got from earning your degree, taking years of lessons, such and such, and say, okay, this was the end goal at the time. This is how we would put the tools together then. A different end goal. How can I put the tools together differently? So, years of skill learning and skill sharing with other people more qualified than myself at the time, and continuing to take lessons. I did take some lessons and buy some courses from people that specialized in trans voice. As part of that supplementally. I think that accelerated things for me or helped me learn how to put the tools together differently.
Okay, so TruVoice Lessons is in the public sphere now. You're advertising and perfectly clear about the services you offer. Have you ever encountered AntiTrans Sentiment from conservative or religious groups or individuals?
I have.
Tell us about it.
So, especially earlier on in the company, when I would put an ad out there, it would seem to attract precisely the wrong people. I don't know why that is. But I'd get people telling me, you're an effing weirdo, or you're blaspheming against God, or you're enabling sin. I would get things like that. These days, almost never, to be honest.
Wow.
I don't know what changed.
Nice.
That those people stopped clumping on to me. But, I don't know, it just doesn't come up that much anymore.
How did that affect you? I think many would have become discouraged and given up. Was it hard to get past those situations and stay positive and motivated?
I think facing any sort of criticism is discouraging
Sure.
and hurtful, and it's especially true when you're the captain of the ship, because it's like, this is my baby. I don't want someone attacking it.
Right.
We do latch onto the negative sometimes, and we can see one negative comment out of 40 positive ones. And
Yeah.
I definitely experienced that. But the thing is, that can be used to your advantage. Stress can be motivation for you to say, okay, how can I mitigate this? Or how can I do better?
Yeah.
How can I do things differently to be more efficient, more productive, help more people, answer to people's concerns I've tried to help but came up short?
You don't just serve trans people. You have cisgender clients too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever had a cisgender client refuse to have a trans instructor?
I'm really trying to think here because my knee-jerk response is no.
Oh, nice.
I can't think of a time where that happened. I can think of a time where I did a trial lesson with someone. I was earlier in my transition. And I could tell something was up. Like they were uncomfortable about something. Maybe that's what it is, maybe not.
Yeah.
And those people wouldn't show up again. But I think people like that tend to just stay away in the first place, is what's happening.
That's
if I
good.
had to give my most educated guess with the information I've got.
How important is it for you to have trans employees? And about what percentage of your employees are trans?
I'd say it's about 50-50 at the moment, with most of the 50 that's not still being LGBT somehow.
Uh-huh.
I think you attract people more readily that line up with your mission and goals.
Yeah, for sure.
Than attracting people that don't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I look for is a willingness to learn new things, embrace new areas of expertise that aren't your own but could be.
Uh-huh.
If you put in the time and effort and you have a willingness.
Mm-hmm.
And I look for people that are passionate about helping the communities that we serve, trans or not.
Yeah.
I would say that if someone's trans and they apply, that is definitely a bonus.
Uh-huh.
But I'm not going to deny someone employment if I think they're a good fit for us and they're not trans.
Yeah, you certainly have an impressive staff. People with advanced degrees and tons of experience. Truly awesome. Okay, let's say someone comes along and says, I want to feminize or deepen my voice. How long does it typically take to reach a convincing feminized or masculinized voice?
It depends on so many factors. But I'll go over a few of those and explain with the caveats that assuming these things, this is a ballpark.
Okay.
So ideally we would work with somebody once a week in lessons. And they would do two kinds of practice between lessons. One is to practice about an hour a day in 15-minute chunks or so, give or take, depending on the person and their situation and capabilities. So there's a lot of what-ifs or yeah-buts.
Yeah.
But ideally, if someone could take a lesson with us once a week, practice about an hour a day in 15-minute spurts where they actually work on the vocal exercises we give them. And then be applying these things in day-to-day life as much as they can, slowly but gradually, so as to mitigate fatigue and exhaustion on the voice. If someone did those things, the ballpark we generally see is 3 to 6 months.
Oh, okay.
It is possible for some people to get there practicing on their own with YouTube videos and stuff, and sometimes they'll get hate. Like, why are you charging for these services? People can do this on their own.
Yeah.
The answer is that it's like a filter. The more things you're willing to do to transition your voice, the higher your chances of success.
Yeah.
There are people that can get there on their own, but the timelines I usually see are 2 or 3 years. And even then, sometimes there's still some rough edges. And that's not a very big percentage of people. So you sift through that layer. You get to lessons. For people that take it seriously, take our advice to heart, and show up consistently and put in the work consistently, that's kind of another layer they sift through. Oftentimes the timeline is going to be much faster. In a lot of cases. Not always, but often.
Yeah.
And much higher percentage of success. Now for people that still aren't happy, the next layer would be vocal surgery.
Ah, yeah.
But with that, there are much higher risks. It's a much higher cost.
For sure.
We're talking like 15 times as much as if you took a few months of lessons every week.
Wow.
And yeah, there's some risks you don't have with the first 2 steps. And then between healing, potentially having to take things like muscle relaxers for a long period of time during the healing process, and still having to do work on your voice and almost quote-unquote rehab, full results from those surgeries can be about 2 years.
Wow.
There's even more than that. That's really the tip of the iceberg. There's also age. What sort of voice are they starting at versus where they want to be?
Right.
How well are they understanding the concepts? And if they're not, is there someone else? Can that teacher or another teacher in our organization explain or do things differently so that the student does get it?
Right.
I mean, I almost think of it like starting hormones. You know, nothing's guaranteed in life.
Right.
But we can do things according to the best practices we've determined with years of trial and error and going through multiple college degrees, some of us, and things. We can say, okay, this is based on my education and experiences and feedback from other people and continuing education, this is the best shot I can give you.
Where do you see TruVoice Lessons 5, 10 years from now?
So my hope now is we've got somewhere in the ballpark of 20 people working for us.
Nice.
Ideally, I'd like to expand that a little bit more. Have several music school, like physical locations in different cities and states around the U.S., with an emphasis being mid-sized cities and large towns, so like 100,000 to 1.5 million, kind of the ballpark metropolitan statistical areas would be targeting. 50 to 75 employees, and that much bigger reach, be on the radar that much more, have a much more complex staff setup and sort of pyramid of hierarchy.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I speak for everyone when I wish you and TruVoice Lessons the best of success. Thank you for being such a positive presence for the trans community, helping people unlock their true voice.
For sure. And that's the thing. We're trying to give people a voice, and that can mean all sorts of things.
Okay, for our in-depth discussion, I was hoping maybe you could take us a little deeper into it. What all is involved in trans voice training?
Okay, so the obvious one people think about is pitch.
Yeah.
That is a factor.
Mm-hmm.
And there are reasons for that. You'll also hear people within certain circles say, it's not all about pitch. Yes, but pitch is still something.
Yeah.
It's not everything. It's not nothing. It's
right.
Somewhere in between.
Right.
So generally speaking, more masculine voices are going to be something in this ballpark. Mm-hmm. Somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
More feminine voices. Something like that. Again, ballpark. You'll see different proposals given by different professionals in different career fields and levels of research and things. I tend to shave the top end of what a more male voice is like, and the bottom end of what a more female or feminine voice is like off. For our purposes, because you got to keep in mind that the anatomy and physiology we're dealing with may be a little bit different.
Yeah.
Precisely because someone is trans and how developmental things have gone.
Right.
So we do alter pitch to the extent that it's appropriate for the individual. Mm-hmm. And for feminine voices, it's probably going to be a little bit higher than like what the lowest possible thing is, and for more masculine voices, a little bit lower than like the highest possible thing they could get away with is. So we kind of shave away the overlap.
Yeah.
And then beyond pitch, there's also resonance. More masculine voices are probably going to feel it more in the throat and really in the chest. More feminine voices will probably feel the resonance in the cheeks, the nose, the sinuses, maybe even getting up into the eyebrows and the forehead, depending on range and what you're doing with the voice and why. And so it's not just a different pitch, but it's a different quality. It's a different buzz to the sound.
Yeah.
And there are acoustic science and voice science reasons for that. Don't want to go too much into jargon. You also run into more feminine voices tend to fluctuate more in pitch, have a bigger vocal range and flexibility as ideas are conveyed. And there's often even more pitch variance when emotions come in.
Yeah.
That strengthen or embolden what's being conveyed. Whereas a more masculine voice is going to have less variation.
Right.
Another thing you'll run into is vowels and consonant sounds for a more feminine sound are generally going to be a little bit further forward in the mouth. So brighter, more forward. You'll hear people say various versions of those things about it. Vowels tend to be a little bit longer. Consonants are a little bit shorter and softer, but still clearly understood. Whereas with the more masculine sounds generally are shifted a little bit further back into the mouth and the throat as far as where they originate, vowels and consonants.
Okay.
pronunciation of things isn't so smooth and connected, like you're singing a musical phrase or playing something really smooth on a violin or something. It tends to be more clunky.
Mm-hmm.
Consonants are a little bit more abrasive and tend to break up words and in between words more.
Uh-huh.
And then volume can be a factor too.
Uh-huh.
If you heard a more feminine voice speaking quite loud, that would probably seem a little bit interesting, or it might pique your interest.
Uh-huh.
Whereas if a masculine voice is kind of quiet and soft, it kind of doesn't seem to quite match up. There is probably more variation and room for differences there than with some of the other things.
Right.
And there's room for variation with all of those elements, but those are general principles for things that someone would hypothetically work on, and differences you would notice if you really put it under a microscope.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned an androgynous voice. It's going to depend on a case-by-case basis a little bit more, because you want to ask, well, androgynous how? Do we want to slant slightly feminine, slightly masculine of center? Do we want to try and bullseye the center as best we can?
Yeah.
So that's going to come down to comfort and goals, and we'd have to get a little more specific there. Then you'd have to ask, well, is the voice starting super feminine and we want to neutralize it, or is it starting super masculine? Is it already kind of neutral, but we just want to improve certain things?
Right.
If so, what things would we improve and why? So that's a little bit more tailored.
So there's a lot more to it than just pitch.
And not even that, but oftentimes people will go into falsetto or head voice when they're trying, if you have a masculine voice and you're trying to imitate or achieve a more feminine voice. But that doesn't happen. It doesn't work like that. Not normally.
Right, and that's when we hear the Mickey Mouse-like voice.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Your story is inspirational, and your work is a tremendous asset to the trans community.
I appreciate that. And I think I'll leave on the note, too, that you're always going to face certain types of negativity no matter what or how you do things. And while certain types of negativity or attention you don't want fade away as you get more in the public eye, some gets worse. And it's important to remember the mission, what you stood for in doing what you're doing. And remember that, there's one negative comment, or there's one person who is dissatisfied, but there's 40 or 50 people that would stand up and say, you're doing a great job, and you've helped me. You can't lose sight of the big picture.
Great words of wisdom. Anna Lantry, thank you again for being on the podcast and for everything you do for the trans community. It was great talking with you.
Sure thing. Nice to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
And there it is, my very first podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you'd told me 10 years ago that one day I would be hosting a trans podcast, I would have laughed in your face. Because there is absolutely nothing that qualifies me to do it. No broadcast or journalism experience whatsoever. I have the opportunity, the means, and the technical skills, but beyond that, the only thing I have going for me is a strong desire. I had a heart for trans advocacy as soon as I started transitioning. When I truly realized the extent of my new marginalization within society, the injustices, the discrimination, the bullying, the degree to which politicians will exploit us to scare up votes. It lit a fire in me. And I've done what I can. I wrote and self-published 2 memoirs, sharing my entire trans experience from childhood to present. I co-founded a trans support group in a conservative part of eastern Washington state. And I'm fortunate enough to help trans people for a living as an instructor at TruVoice Lessons. maybe I am qualified to do a trans podcast. Whether I'm qualified or not, I'm going to give it my all. I hope you will like us on Facebook and join in the conversation. Remember, neither the media nor society as a whole will give us fair representation. We're on our own, and it's up to us. Let's show the world how awesome we are. Until next time, I'm Christiana, and this is Trans Chat, brought to you by TruVoice Lessons LLC. Take care, be safe, be you, and be proud.